question our daughter. Eventually, the Swiss Child Protection Agency, with the school's support, brought a case against us in the Swiss court system. And that has meant for us many sleepless nights, a lot of deep pain, and a sense of hopelessness.
Their child is now 16 and has spent more than a year living in a government shelter. Her parents spending thousands of dollars fighting to reinstate their parental rights and reunite with their child. But sadly, they lost the case this week. And now, under threat of criminal charges, they're being forced to hand over legal documents to facilitate their child's sex change.
Taking an adolescent, telling him or her that he or she is born in the wrong body is cruel. So it's really out of this pain and this desperation that we have decided there's really no other option but to speak up. The Swiss government essentially took our daughter away from us.
We want our daughter back home. We love her and we miss her.
This has been Matt Boylands with your TNT News Brief. I'll be back with more at the top of the next hour.
If you've been told to pull up your socks, then make sure it's a pair of TNT socks. The TNT shop is now open at tntradio.live. From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Muckrakers on TNT. I'm Taylor Hudak, joined by my fantastic co-hosts, Andrew Eborn and Basil Valentine. Today is Thursday, August 1st, and I have to say, I can't believe that it's already the final month of summer, at least for those of us in the Northern Hemisphere. But wherever you are in the world, whether you're joining us with your morning cup of coffee, on your lunch break, or in the evening, we are happy to have you watching The Muckrakers, a show where we separate fact from fiction and fact from opinion. Now, many of you are aware that we are living in a tumultuous information age in what feels like a very turbulent and unstable world. Oftentimes, political leaders say one thing and do another. Media reporting has somewhat become nothing more than just public relations for the state. And with a lack of transparency from our government institutions, people are left to decide for themselves or speculate for themselves what the truth really is. So today, during the next hour on this episode, we will examine the media distortions as well as disinformation in the context of the recent developments coming out of the UK with the recent outbreak of violence, as well as public health disinformation that we have been exposed to, other reporting on certain crimes that may or may not be related to terrorism, etc. So that's what we have in store for you today. I first do want to discuss things taking place in the UK, specifically the violence. And before I do get into the details there and some of the media coverage of this particular incident, of course, we do not want to forget the fact that 3 young lives have been lost. Here at TNT, our hearts and condolences go out to the families and friends of those young girls and the community at large. But if we do take a look at the media coverage here, there has been a lot of speculation as to the perpetrator of this attack. And the media is also suggesting that the misinformation on social media has led to the violence that we are seeing in Southport, in London, and throughout the UK. Now, there are a few reasons as to why we don't know much information about this suspect. He is 17 years old, so he is a minor. So the police, the authorities are legally bound to not provide the full scope of information about this individual. But this has led people to question, who is he? Where did he come from? And as I said, this has led to a lot of speculation. Andrew, I'm going to hand it over to you. Do you think that misinformation online has perhaps led to some of the violence that we're seeing? I personally think this is somewhat of a slippery slope here to blame the violence on media misinformation, but it's something that is being discussed very seriously in the mainstream media in the UK. So why don't you go ahead and share your thoughts?
Well, in this particular instance, Taylor, I think absolutely misinformation has led to the violence. And I always say that we're living in a diseased information age, drowning in misinformation and disinformation. And there's never been a more important time to question everything. And we covered this tragedy on the Muckrakers earlier this week, and we were extremely careful not to speculate and to bring in all sorts of prejudices, which others in the media have done. And what I always urge people to do is let's look at the facts and separate those facts from opinion. So what are the facts? The facts, as we know, that a 17-year-old, as you say, has been charged with the murder of 3 young girls at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class in Southport. For legal reasons, the 17-year-old can't be named, and they've urged that we be very, very careful so that the trial itself is not prejudiced. The victims, as you rightly say, our hearts go out to them, and it's appalling. B.B. King was only 6 years old. Elsie Dot Stankham was 7 years old, and Alice Da Silva Aguirre was 9 years old. The attack occurred at the Hart Space Centre, and a teenager has been charged with 10 counts in addition to the murder counts of attempted murder and possession of a bladed article. Horrendously, 8 other children, 2 adults were injured, and some are still in critical condition. So, as you rightly say, our hearts go out to all the families. And even there's a plea on some of the papers out here. They talk about sort of outrage and things like that. The families there, what happens on the streets when it all spilled out and the baying mobs have started raiding places and things like that, the families are just saying this is just adding to the grief and distress that we're suffering. And what happened, we had Ursula Doyle, that was announced by Mersey Police during a midnight press conference, and she said we've got to have a fair trial and cautioned against prejudicing proceedings. And there was also Chief Constable Serena Kennedy. She said that it's an ongoing investigation involving the Lancashire Police and counter-terrorism units. The incident obviously deeply shocked the Southport community, and what happened is there were lots of attacks and protests and unrest. We had 100 arrests in central London yesterday, as well as horrendous violence in Southport. What happened is there was an attack on the mosque. I saw shops, some of the footage that was released. I saw shops being attacked. 50 officers were injured as a result. And apparently what's happened is the unrest was reportedly fueled by this social media misinformation suggesting an Islamic link to the stabbing. There's been no such thing established. And I think our rush to get there first on the news is so dangerous. And if ever there are a warning, and I make this point so often, if ever there's a warning for people in the media to take your job responsibly, what you are doing affects lives, and it's actually people's lives are being cost as a result of it. That's my view.
Interesting insights. I think that there is something to be said that when there is a lack of information with regard to certain very highly emotional events such as this one, or emotional tragedies such as this one, people are often left to speculate, and violence can erupt and can outbreak. Basil, I want you to also weigh in here with your thoughts. Any reaction to what Andrew said? What do you think is perhaps causing the violent outbursts that we are seeing in the UK?
Well, to use the popular term, we've got to get granular with exactly what's happened over the last few days. And it was a news website called Channel 3 Now that first reported online on the X platform that the identity of the attacker, it was somebody called Ali Al-Shakati, who had arrived in the UK on a small boat and was on the MI6 watch list, hence people taking to the streets in Southport and attacking a mosque. Now, Channel 3 Now poses as an American website, and the claims were reposted and seen by nearly 2 million viewers before being deleted. This misinformation was quickly picked up by what the Daily Mirror are calling far-right thug Tommy Robinson. I wouldn't disagree with them there. And indeed Andrew Tate, who told his 10 million followers that an illegal migrant had stabbed 6 little girls and told people to wake up. So that appears to be the kernel of where this all came from. The news website, Channel 3 News, I've been looking at it this morning. It is supposedly linked to Russia. They have a banner headline on their website now with a sincere apology and correction regarding the Southport stabbing incident. They admit they got it wrong. I can't attest as to the links to Russia, how accurate they are or not. The stories that they're leading with are the victims themselves are being identified, a missing person, the arrest of the 17-year-old, and the fact that I say fact, I'm quoting this particular website here. We don't know whether this is further misdirection, but they're now saying that the 17-year-old suspect was born in Cardiff to Rwandan parents and moved to the Southport area in 2013. A former neighbour expressed profound shock and disbelief upon hearing the news and said that during their time in Cardiff, they were a seemingly ordinary household, with the mother primarily focused on homemaking and the father consistently employed. So not much to go on there as to a motive. We don't even know if that's true. Once again, that's Channel 3 now having issued their apology. But that's where all this started, was that fake report. Whether it was a mistake or whether it was deliberately designed to inflame tensions, that's another matter, and it's very difficult to say. But what we can say is that, the establishment talking heads and powerful talking heads at that, former boss of MI5, Sir Richard Dearlove, and the former security minister, Stephen McPartland, have both suggested that Russia could be behind the social misinformation campaign, which led to the scenes in Southport. Richard Dearlove was talking to LBC's Nick Ferrari this morning, and he fears that Kremlin bots could be doing not only this, but perhaps other things. I mean, they're already being accused of, once again, they're replaying the 2016 election Russian meddling scenario with respect to Kamala Harris. It's quite bizarre.
Right. Let me just jump in here, then hand it over to Andrew. I will say, I think many people are going to see these reports coming out of the Daily Mail. It was a special investigation which appears to link a certain account or website to the Russian Federation, claiming that Russia is somehow behind stirring up violence in the UK. I have to be honest, many people are going to hear that and find it quite cartoonish, given the fact that, as you had mentioned, Basil, there has been, of course, accusations that Russia was involved in election interference in the United States in 2016. The United States and the Western world has a tendency to blame other countries for its domestic turmoil. We also just recently saw that Iran was blamed for potentially being involved with the assassination attempt against the former president, Donald Trump. So people are skeptical when they hear reports that seem to point blame at the Western enemies, being Iran, China, Russia. Andrew, any thoughts on the validity to this report and it being a substantial report? Do you think that people have a right to be skeptical here? Or do you think that this report shows a clear connection with Russia?
I think it's very clear, as you say. It's always we rush to demonize the usual people, don't we, in the usual states. I did do a deep dive myself, however, into Channel 3 now. There's still the website is up there, and also the Twitter account, which is referenced. When you look at it, however, they've only got 3,276 followers, and they're following 21. And it's very interesting to see who they're actually following. They're doing a deep dive. They're following the Minneapolis police, the city of Philadelphia, the Fairfax County, and Baltimore police. Not that many people. It's tiny. But they do, as Basil mentioned, they do say our response to on a misleading information published in our recent article on our website, Channel 3 Now, we deeply regret any confusion or inconvenience this may have caused. It's up there. They have a tiny following. I can see no evidence, and I'll be always open, say keep your open mind, of any Russian influence at all. They say they're based in the US. But my concern is this, is that lots of people are jumping on tragedy in order to promote their own causes. The rioters and looters and the appalling scenes that we saw up in Southport and also in London have nothing to do with the grief that the families are suffering. And actually, those those families have begged them not to let this spill out into something else. And this is what we need to address.
But just to jump in quickly, those numbers for Channel 3 now, very small reach, and yet 2 million people saw their misinformation. Tommy Robinson picked it up, so did Andrew Tate. That would seem to indicate that there may be other actors at work amplifying Channel 3 now, certainly in this case, because it's very difficult to get that kind of reach and get influencers to retweet and amplify a story without a third party being involved in some way. For such a negatively small organization as Channel 3 now, about whom I can't find a Wikipedia article. And usually we get something on all these people and who they are and where they're based. And also, it's very easy to say Russian linked. You can just say that without actually demonstrating what those links are. They got Russian shareholders. Do we know who the shareholders are? What's the identity of the commissioning editor, so on and so forth. None of that is yet in the public domain, as far as I can tell.
And what we should do, I'm just pick up on a couple of points there, Basil. We should actually get somebody from Channel 3 on and let's actually quiz them about that. But I would urge also against getting your information from, and we'll get Jeremy onto that. He's going to make the phone calls by the end of the show and say they're booked for the next one. What I would say is don't get your information from Wikipedia. Wikipedia can basically be edited by anybody, and whilst it's the wisdom of the crowd, there is so much misleading information there. What it does remind us that we have to get our information from as many different sources as possible. We have to question that information, and as I say, as we always like to do here on the Muckrakers, not just ask the questions but question those answers.
Absolutely. And great points that you mentioned about the specific account. It is called Channel 3, or it was at one time a few days ago referred to as Channel 3. It's also designed to look like a reputable mainstream media news channel. So it seems like it's somewhat of a sophisticated, perhaps, operation to intentionally deceive people. But I also have questions as to how this account and its posts were able to reach some very prominent individuals, political people, and actually influence them to act in a violent way. But anyways, great points, gentlemen, viewers. We do need to take a short break. When we return, we will continue our discussion on disinformation in an unstable world. You're watching the Muckrakers. Stick with us.
The challenges our planet's animals are facing sometimes feel a bit heavy.
The animals haven't eaten in a day, 2 days. They haven't drank anything. They're cold. They're dehydrated.
As soon as we started our descent, everywhere I could see was mud. Just absolutely mud.
The country has been in prolonged drought for so long. It was like a tinderbox waiting to go up.
Okay, very heavy. Each of us wants to be part of the solution, and we can be. Remember that there's good happening right now. At home.
All right, we were able to get into your unit, and we have all 4 of your cats. So,
okay.
And around the world. For any animal in any disaster. So let's focus on that, right? Be part of the solution, one rescue at a time. Search ifa.org/disaster ready.
A better business tip from TNT Radio. News Talk Radio listeners are some of the most active and involved listeners of any format. TNT Radio listeners rely on TNT Radio often as their primary source of information. They trust TNT Radio and are highly engaged with the content. If you'd like more information about advertising on TNT Radio, simply fill out your details on our contact page and we'll be in touch. To find out more, go to tntradio.live. The Muckrakers are restless. This is today's News Talk, TNT.
All right, everyone, picking back up where we left, we want to continue our discussion on disinformation, social media, and the threat of real-world violence. Now, I did mention earlier in the discussion today that I felt that it was perhaps a slippery slope to equate speech online with real-world violence. I have no doubts that, of course, violent speech online or certain rhetoric can incite people to act or behave in a very aggressive and illegal and violent way. Perhaps that's what we're seeing here. However, if you look at some of the legislation that has passed, say in the UK with the Online Safety Bill, and in Europe, continental Europe, with the European Media Freedom Act, these proposals spring out Due to situations such as this one, where there's violence and it's suspected that online speech has led to this violence, or perhaps disinformation, whether that be with regard to reporting on COVID-19 or the war in Ukraine, has led to real world harm, there is then a crackdown on dissident voices, dissident speech online, and actual journalists who do a great job at reporting the truth and facts that happens to go against the establishment narrative. So my point here is that my concern is that potentially the reaction or the solution to the problem that we're seeing is actually going to be far worse than the problem itself, that it's actually going to restrict speech, restrict journalists' ability to do their jobs and report facts that happen to go against the mainstream narrative. Do either of you share this concern? And perhaps you can touch on the online safety bill, which seeks to sort of maybe not criminalize, but absolutely punish harmful speech that is not necessarily illegal speech. So Basil, I'll hand it to you. Do you have concerns about this as well?
Oh, absolutely, particularly when you get people like Sir Richard Dearlove and the former Security Minister, Stephen McPartland, immediately chiming in. I mean, of course, the violence is regrettable. I mean, it does actually bring to the surface underlying racial, religious, community tensions that have been festering, particularly in the north of England, for some time. And a spark like this can set them off. The rioters were chanting, "English till I die," "No surrender," that "stop the boats," that sort of thing. You can say that this rhetoric is fueled by Nigel Farage, but the simple fact is that large numbers of people from South Asia have arrived in parts of the north of England over the last 30 or 40 years, and they're not very well integrated. People don't like hearing that, but it's a fact. The communities are not integrated. They live apart. Now, of course, that's nothing to do with this stabbing incident. The perpetrator, from everything we know, was not a Muslim. But it doesn't take much to ignite these things the way things are at the moment. And that point has to be made. Hence, there is the opportunity for bad faith actors entering the news space in particular to seek to set fire to that tinderbox. And that's why the Home Office are launching an investigation as to the origin of these social media posts, as well they should. Again, as you say, whether that investigation then leads to conclusions that every news organization has to be vetted by some sort of Big Brother news vetting process, which would effectively emasculate organizations like our own. Well, we hope not. I don't want to speculate too far in that direction, but that is always the danger. If we want to live in a free and fair society, an open, liberal society, unfortunately, we have to accept that there may be bad faith actors entering the global news marketplace and deliberately planting disinformation in order to stir up trouble. Now, whether or not that comes from Russia or whether or not that comes from people who want to point the finger at Russia, we simply don't know, because we're getting there into a very murky world of espionage, counter-espionage, bluff and double bluff.
Andrew?
No, you're absolutely right, and some excellent points there. And I always say, I mean, it's the old saying, isn't it? If you don't read the newspaper, you're ill-informed, and if you do read the newspaper, you're misinformed. We have to question everything. At the same time, it is freedom of speech, and freedom of speech is fundamental to any democracy, but not freedom from consequences. And when we're urging people just to be very responsible in the media, this is different to freedom of speech. It's not freedom of speech to come up with misinformation. It's not freedom of speech to go looting somebody's shops and stealing television and cigarettes and alcohol and that sort of stuff. That's got nothing to do with the murder of 3 little girls. And it's, again, we have this terrible rhetoric that we have sometimes in the media where we're basically taking offense at anything. And if you look out for your own particular missions, you will find evidence that you can then bring to the forefront and utilize somebody else's tragedy for your own ends. And that is abhorrent. But just on your thing about restricting freedom of speech, we had up in Scotland very recently, you might remember, there was the big thing about expanding the rules about hate speech and so on and so forth to deal with the trans and various other rights and other bits and pieces on that sort of thing. And J.K. Rowling bowling, as in bowling, she came out and said, look, come and arrest me first. Because what they were saying up in Scotland is that they would investigate every single complaint. And this is when people were having other crimes not even being looked at and so on and so forth. And quite rightly, there was an uproar about it. But JK, she basically put out her neck on this sort of basis and said, look, hang about, we've got to be able to call these things out in the right sort of way. But we need to make a distinction between freedom of speech and things which are basically incitement, if you like, to riots and incitement to cause damage. And that is wrong. That's not freedom of speech. That's abhorrent. And we have an obligation to call it out.
Yes, well said. I mean, just going back to this Channel 3 New Now crowd, according to the Mail Online, that started 11 years ago as a Russian YouTube channel and posted videos of rally drivers in the snow in Izhevsk, 750 miles east of Moscow. It was then dormant for 6 years before suddenly posting videos in English in 2019 about a tiger being beaten to death and a match report on the Manchester City women's football team. This is a very unusual pattern of behaviour for an organisation that suddenly wants to get involved in provoking violence in the UK. We don't even really know if the Channel 3 Now of the website that you and I have been looking at this morning, Andrew, is the same Channel 3 Now that was posting videos of Russian drivers in the snow 11 years ago.
Yeah, and if it is, I think they probably get more clickbait on that sort of basis, and it's tiny the amount of followers they've got. I say 3,276, barely to be sneezed at for a media organisation. But as I say, hopefully before the end of this programme, Jeremy will tell us that he's reached out to them. Jeremy, our brilliant producer, that he's reached out to Channel 3, and we'll try and get them on a future episode. And if anybody from Channel 3 is watching, do get in touch. We'd love to hear your take on this. You've apologised for the misinformation that you spread, and I think that it's only right and proper we give you a platform to answer those questions so we don't speculate, we don't fall into the same trap that others have done.
They've actually said that made sure that the team responsible for publishing this news is fired, but the apology apparently contains several errors and is believed to have been written by an AI program. Honestly, Andrew, Taylor, what a weird and sometimes not so wonderful world it is we live in.
Though AI would have done a better job. ChatGPT is very good at a first draft, but you have to have a look at it. No, I mean, it reads like a sincere apology. We deeply regret any confusion or inconvenience that may have been caused. We'll deeply regret the people who've been injured as a result of it. Deeply regret the outrage caused by the little girls' families and community as a result of the riots which were sparked by this. But I think as the point you made earlier, Basil, is absolutely right. People are looking for an excuse. It is a tinderbox, isn't it? Where people are turning around with their own. They've got their own issues to deal with and all sorts of questions to be asked. But we have to turn down the narrative. And I often sort of say that this is what we're doing. And there's a big mistake. I referenced last time we were on the interview that I did on another program on TNT, where somebody was saying, well, pro-ceasefire, this is all you are is an apologist for Hamas. And they were talking on that sort of basis. And actually, the question I would ask them is, what do you say to the Israeli families who are hoping to get their children back, the hostages back, and they're turning around as a result of increasing that rhetoric, you're stopping peace happening? That's got to be wrong.
Absolutely. And these phrases are used against people so often, being anti-Semitic, pro-Hamas. It has really lost its meaning. And I think people are becoming more aware of this fact. But given that we are talking about online activity, I think it is worth just mentioning briefly here some of the aspects of the UK intelligence operations online. We learned from the Snowden documents that there is a GCHQ program, JTRIG. I'm not saying that this account is an extension of that or part of it, but it's just worth mentioning. JTRIG, that's the Joint Threat Response Intelligence Group. It is a unit, a part of the GCHQ, which its intent is to disrupt, disturb, deter online activity. It's a branch of the UK intelligence. It has been widely criticized for disrupting movements leading to violence. So I just want to mention that could be at play here. Again, could be at play, but it is worth absolutely mentioning, as well as, of course, the 77th Brigade. So when we do talk about some of the strange aspects to this account, this Channel 3 news, and it being tied to Russian intelligence, to me, I do wonder if this could be a part of a larger British intelligence operation based on the information that we have regarding JTRIG and the 77th Brigade. But I also want to point to previous events or suspected terror attacks that have occurred in the UK, in the United States, further rushes to judgment. I'll just get both of you to weigh in on this. This was a report that was released yesterday. I initially saw it in the New York Post. I find the timing quite interesting given what is taking place in the Middle East right now. But the alleged mastermind behind the 9/11 attacks, three of them have reached a plea agreement with the United States Department of Justice, or with the prosecutors, rather. And these three individuals are suspected, as I said, of being masterminds behind the 9/11 attacks. The article doesn't go into depth as to exactly their connection to 9/11. I know that on the Muckrakers, there was a deep dive discussion about 9/11. I would encourage everybody to check that out after the show today. But have both of you had a chance to look at this report? And can you draw any parallels perhaps between 9/11, the initial reporting on that, some of the reporting that we've seen recently, and what has just recently transpired in the UK? Basil, I'll hand it over to you.
Well, the reports are perfunctory and extremely brief to start with. They give no details as to exactly how Khalid Sheikh Mohammed masterminded 9/11. We're all supposed to believe still that 3 buildings fell down because 2 planes fell into them, when the physics says that no buildings should have fallen down on that day, according to the planes flying into them. So, the whole 9/11 story is a tissue of lies from start to finish. It's interesting that this story has been picked up by all the corporate media. Here it is, finally. We can put that one to bed. Here's the mastermind, and the picture circulating of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed looks like, dare I say it, a Turkish kebab owner after a particularly heavy night out. He's got his head down, a large bushy moustache, probably been waterboarded a few times that day already. Worth remembering, or rather absolutely central to these so-called confessions and this plea deal, is that these people have been tortured every day for 20 years. They've been in Guantanamo Bay in the most horrendous conditions. On the Patrick Henningsen show last week, I interviewed Philip Diaz, the director of a new film about Guantanamo Bay, I Am Gitmo. People were simply rounded up off the streets of Iraq and Afghanistan and taken to Guantanamo Bay and tortured. And if they didn't have anything to say, if they didn't know anything about terrorism, then that was taken as a sign of uncooperation. The American authorities are deliberately vague about the number of people held in Guantanamo. That's so that they can die at regular intervals and not be held responsible. The whole thing is a complete abomination. The story of 9/11 is a tissue of lies, and this is just the latest chapter. The timing, well, some sort of process has been going on, but I think if you'd been waterboarded every day for 20 years, you'd sign just about anything.
Exactly. And it's also worth noting that the U.S. system is set up in a way where people are just not even just those who are charged with crimes related to terrorism, but any sort of criminal charge brought against someone. The justice system tends to stack up many, many charges, which just leads people to have a tendency to want to make a plea deal because it's easier, it's cost effective, and they feel that it is worth it given the extensive process they would have to go to should they plead not guilty. But yes, waterboarding and the torturous circumstances that they were under is worth noting. Go ahead, Basil.
I think in the case of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and these other two, I think there was a partial setup, just as in the same way that Lee Harvey Oswald was maneuvered into position by the people actually responsible for the assassination of John F. Kennedy. There's actually a photograph of Oswald standing in the doorway of the Texas School Book Depository next to Billy Lovelady. So he couldn't possibly have been on the 6th floor shooting. That photo only emerged a couple of years ago. But nevertheless, various actors made a case against Oswald, at least vaguely plausible. And the same thing, I think, happened to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the others. I think, well, we know that the FBI have been setting up terrorist sting operations throughout this century. And similarly, I think Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and the other two were made to feel that they might be part of something without actually being them. I mean, the idea that he was the mastermind or something is frankly completely and utterly laughable. Andrew.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and you need to look at all those things and ask those questions. And I always, as you say, you need to say, well, why is this coming out now? A very good point. You work on that sort of basis. Is that going to help anybody? I'm always a bit worried about plea deals, and I was worried about the Julian Assange plea deal when you might remember he got off, and because of time already served, he didn't have to spend any more time in prison. If you're not guilty, don't plead guilty. Don't do a plea deal, and you've got to ask what are the circumstances surrounding that. Details of the deals, as you say, specifics are not public, but they pled guilty. The idea is that the prosecution now won't seek the death penalty, and that's the reason they did it. As you also pointed out, they've been held at Guantanamo Bay without trial for years, and the people have reported about the conditions there. You can draw your own conclusions. The question, however, is who does this benefit? Because the victim family, their reaction, some of the victims, they've been speaking to this, the families, 9/11, the families, they say they're deeply troubled by the plea deal, expressing concerns about transparency and justice. So they're not feeling happy about it either, because they're feeling as though they've been let down after so many years. There's also the question of the role of Saudi Arabia. Families are urging further investigation into the potential role of Saudi Arabia, and 15 of the 19 hijackers being Saudi nationals is what it's reported. But again, we need to look at all of these. So for me, there are still so many questions unanswered, and it sounds as though it's a sort of convenience, if you like. They pled guilty now, let's hope we sweep it under the carpet.
Yeah, exactly. Now, looking back to the UK, I do think it is worth having a brief discussion about the suicide bombing in Manchester, in the Manchester arena in the UK. Of course, the perpetrator was another young man, British national of Libyan descent. It was revealed that he was known to the intelligence agencies for quite some time. However, he slipped under the radar. So this raises questions for me. I'm sure others. I'll be interested if you two agree or disagree with me. But do you have faith that the way to solve the issue that we're seeing, the mass violence recently in the UK, and this issue of so-called terror, can that be solved by these intelligence agencies? Again, this goes back to my point, which is that I'm concerned that any policy that arises due to the situation that has emerged in the UK will only come to the benefit of the state for information gathering purposes, which violates our privacy, because we know that what they have in place is already not working. It's already not working. So how can we trust that further measures are going to actually work and prevent these attacks from happening, whether that be measures such as stop and search by UK police on any citizen or anybody within the UK, or measures online to restrict speech, whether that be actual free speech or incitement and violent rhetoric. Basil, thoughts on this?
Well, we don't know what's in the pipeline in terms of further restrictions on the internet global space with respect to news reporting. We can only keep putting it out there, folks. We can only keep telling the truth like we do on this channel. I don't want to speculate too much about what may or may not happen in the future, because I'd much rather just stay in the present, report the news as we find it, and break down the obvious lies that we're being told. And I think if we do that, if we use truth as our shield and right as our sword, then we won't go too far wrong.
I see you shaking your head, Andrew. And any other thoughts before we take a quick break?
Absolutely. And I always make the point that our only mission here on TNT, the only mission we have, is our unwavering quest for the truth. And if all people in the media accept, we have a massive responsibility to do that, to make sure we try to get at the facts, not to be first, not to rush in with the story so we can get that clickbait and so on and so forth, but actually have a responsibility to the truth. We don't support any side in this other than trying to find out what the facts are. And we always make a distinction whenever we go into any of these subjects. We say, look, these are the facts as we know them. Based on those facts, these are our opinion. But you need to separate the two. But you're right, there are all sorts of questions about when laws might be introduced and so on and so forth. Basil?
Well, I mean, it's very often just simply the exposure of facts that the establishment are afraid of and that the corporate media don't do. So That's the case across the board with so-called conspiracy theories. What we're actually talking about is people's access to information. Alex Jones, for all his faults, he got it right 25 years ago when he called his website InfoWars, the information wars, because you can only be as well informed and make mature opinions according to the information that you have available to you. And if your information comes from an extremely narrow set of sources that follow solely government lines, there may be, cast iron facts about situations that don't adhere to government narratives. And that's what the corporate media likes to try and hide. It actually likes to deliberately hide all the BBC hoo-ha about fact-checking and all that. They actually like to hide certain facts. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, and you also, again, you mentioned Alex Jones, and whilst there's a lot of good there was also a lot of awful stuff. And he basically had the largest defamation awards in US history as a result of what he said about Sandy Hook and the shooting there. So we have to be very, very careful. And as I mentioned at the beginning, when we're talking about the terrible event, the murder of these three children, is we don't want to prejudice proceedings, but we also have to tread a very fine line between what are the facts and also defamation, because we don't want the channel to be shut down as a result of accusations or unsubstantiated claims. All we can do is say, look, this is what's been reported. These are the facts as we know it. And on which Tommy Robinson has been slightly misrepresented in the press about what's actually going on. They say, they've issued an arrest warrant for him. It's to do with a defamation action and what happened there. And he was ordered to pay a certain amount of compensation and not to repeat. And he's shown a particular documentary in breach of that order. So the arrest was not for something stopping freedom of speech. It was basically saying you're in contempt of court. And that's what happens with contempt of court. So we have to dial down the rhetoric. We have to call out injustice where it genuinely is injustice, but also call out people who are trying to advance certain propositions just to support their own particular cause.
Yes, exactly.
Excellent points, gentlemen. I do need to intervene. We do need to take a brief break. When we return, we are going to shift gears and take a look at disinformation in the COVID era. I know a lot of people don't want to hear about COVID anymore, but we'll keep it brief. It is important to touch on this. How could we possibly talk about disinformation and misinformation without touching on COVID-19, as well as the disinformation put forth by the various public health agencies and sort of the rewriting of history with regards to the so-called pandemic of 2020. All right, we'll take a brief break. You're watching the Muckrakers on TNT. Stick with us.
Anticipate potential delays for the morning commute. In other news, a recent government report on prescription drug pricing points to corporate
Freedom of the press is about your right to know.
Create offenses. What
are you talking about, man? Look at his stats.
Clark sheer athleticism.
It's about your right to be informed. Your right to access all types of information keeps us free as a nation.
No.
Today, there are real threats to press freedom.
Residential areas by...
And your right to know about the world around us.
Look.
Some threats are obvious, some are easy to miss, but they all put our way of life at risk. We must defend against all of these threats, no matter what kind of news is important to you.
Justified putting American troops in harm's way?
That's a great question.
We must protect our right to know before it's too late. Understand the threats. ProtectPressFreedom.org.
Many pollution sources can affect the air you breathe, from power plants and vehicles to dust and wildfires. Knowing more about local air quality can help you protect your health. If you're thinking about buying an air sensor, EPA has a series of videos to help you get the most out of it. Learn how EPA collects and uses regulatory data, how EPA communicates health messaging, and how to interpret the readings from your sensor. Visit epa.gov/air-sensor-toolbox.
From national security to global corruption, this is the Muckrakers on today's News Talk, TNT.
All right, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us. Basil, I'm going to hand it right over to you. Then we'll get into some discussion about COVID-19 misinformation. But you had some breaking news information related to this topic that you wanted to share with the viewers and also discuss. So I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, well, it's not just a question of what does appear online that influences the way people think and vote, for that matter. It's also what doesn't appear online. Now, after the shooting in Butler, Pennsylvania, it seemed that Donald Trump was a shoo-in for the presidency. Even the owner of Facebook, Zuckerberg, thought that Trump was an absolute badass in that moment. And there he was, punching the air, blood on his face, the Secret Service agents propping him up. It was reminiscent of that famous photo at Iwo Jima with the GIs raising the flag. But that image seems to have disappeared from social media, from our online space. There's something that's prompted Republican Representative Matt Gaetz, a big Trump supporter, to launch a probe into whether the Biden administration, which we know was responsible for all sorts of mis and disinformation in the 2020 election campaign, whether or not it has participated in the social media erasure of those photos. In a letter to the Homeland Security Secretary, Alejandro Mayorkas, the Florida Republican, has asked whether the Department of Homeland Security has participated in any discussions of search results after the assassination attempt. I mean, I don't think you'll get a particularly straight answer from Mayorkas, who's implacable opponent of Donald Trump. But it just goes to show that even something as recent, as relevant, I would almost say as seemingly impartial. I mean, it's a fact that, of course, that image does reflect well on Trump, but it's a news item. Have the Biden administration really been guilty of taking it offline? It wouldn't surprise me. I wouldn't put anything past them at all. We know how the FBI and the DOJ have weaponized social media, and it may well be continuing to this day. So there you go.
Andrew, I see you've got something on your phone.
Oh, no, absolutely. So I just to Basil's point, and just to check it in real time, I did a Google search. It is that image of the horrendous assassination attempt and Trump's defiant look with blood on his face and so on, fight, and that sort of wonderful thing will be an iconic picture, I predict, and will go down in history as one of the biggest moments in American history. And yet, when you look at the initial pages, the pictures of Trump, there's all him with his hair ruffled and various other things. Keep scrolling down. It doesn't appear anywhere on the first sort of searches for that sort of site. And the other point I would make is that in the media, what they've done, they've all started mocking his enormous bandage that he had on his ear. And the other thing they're starting to do to try and discredit him in a way is they're saying, well, they're doing a close-up on his ear now. He no longer has the bandage on it. And a lot of people are asking, well, where's the injury? And the whole idea of them asking, well, where's the injury, is they're trying to discredit him as though it didn't happen, as though it's a denial that there was an assassination attempt. So clearly, as we said at the very beginning, we need to question everything. We need to question the motives of those asking those questions.
You know, it's interesting you bring up the assassination attempt against former President Trump, Andrew, because I noticed that there were some mainstream media figures who are the first to say, this is a conspiracy, that's a conspiracy, this is fake news, who were very early on saying that the assassination attempt was just that, fake news. A reporter with MSNBC, the name escapes me now, but I would encourage the viewers to just check this out. I was quite surprised by that, because they're the ones that are usually to say, hey, this is a conspiracy theory. But I've seen the rhetoric online. I've seen the questions. People are confused about the ear bandage. With regard to the U.S. election, speaking more broadly, I've seen that the media in unison is now referring to Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, as weird. Have either of you two seen this? I'm sure the viewers have, or at least some people have. He's being referred to as weird. Yeah, it's very interesting. I'm trying to understand what the point is behind that, but they're definitely trying to give people the distance from him.
I'll tell you what happened. We discussed this on yesterday's Muckraker with George Samueli and also Martin. And basically, it's not only that, but he was being accused of humping his couch and so on and so forth. And what you do, if you throw enough dirt around, it will stick. Tell a lie often enough and it sticks. And this is what happens. So they're working on that sort of basis. So yes, exactly that, in the same way as you had all these little nicknames, you know, Crooked Hillary and so on and so forth. This is what people hope on all sides. If you throw enough dirt around, some of it will stick.
Yeah, and of course they're attacking Trump for his questioning of Kamala Harris's identity. It was hilarious, his exchange at the black journalists event where he said, I always thought of her as Indian. She was, Indian, promoting Indian, that is South Asian, promoting Indian views. And then a few years ago, she became black. I respect both. It was absolutely hilarious exchange. But I've seen a photograph on X this morning, which I can only hope and believe is genuine, of Kamala Harris's family when she was much younger. And the women are in saris, and the men are very obviously South Asian Indian. Brown, black, who cares? But Kamala is presenting herself as African American, and she doesn't appear to be that at all. So there's a case where he's being attacked for saying something that was actually self-evidently the case. So it's bizarre.
Yeah. Well, you say who cares, Basil. I can tell you who cares is obviously if she wants to say that she's black and she's appealing to black voters as well. I mean, that's the whole point. Those are the people who care, and it's trying to work on that sort of basis in the same way as Trump has been photoed. With the
believe it or not, I hate to have to say so, but I know some South Asian people who are quite racist towards black people, and vice versa. There isn't necessarily any great cohesion between Asians and African Americans, or black British people for that matter. It's just a fact, unfortunately.
Yeah. Oh, no. And it's important to say. And we're so scared, aren't we, sometimes of saying the truth. And there is prejudice everywhere. And it's good that we call out that prejudice.
Absolutely. Now, I did mention before the break, I'll touch on it just briefly, because I do think it is worth mentioning, of course, when discussing misinformation, disinformation, which, by the way, is an accusation that was leveled against people who actually spoke the truth, or at least spoke against the official narrative with regard to COVID-19. And again, many people may be hearing this thinking, oh, gosh, who cares about COVID-19? It's a thing of the past. I understand all of that, but I want people to be aware of a few points here that are very relevant to today. And that is the fact that there was an EUA authorized in the United States, that's emergency use authorization for bird flu vaccines. We need to have our radar up about this, and we need to learn our lessons from the past 3-4 years, starting with COVID-19, and be on alert to not be fooled again, because there have been real world consequences from the disinformation put out about these injections, put out about this virus that have impacted people, that are still impacting them today. People are suffering from vaccine injury, vaccine harm, and also from mental health problems due to being locked down in their homes, losing loved ones, and also now having to care for family members who are potentially harmed as a result of these vaccines. We must not let this happen again. We must stay vigilant, because it seems that tensions are arising in the United States, at least with regard to bird flu, as they have just authorized the EUAs with the bird flu vaccines, as I said. And then also looking at the UK, remember a few months ago, they passed legislation in which those who owned chickens in the UK had to register how many chickens they had, or they would be fined or even put in jail for up to a year. This is all interconnected. We still need to gather some more information on this, but I think that we should be very aware and learn lessons from the past and not be fooled again, and really seek out truthful information, which is what we do on this show. Basil, I see you're eager to weigh in here, perhaps. Any other things that you want to raise as we begin to wrap up today's episode?
Oh, well, just that, the COVID farrago, as I like to call it, was a military-grade psychological operation in coercion and control. The only good thing to have come out of it, really, is the so-called freedom movement, although that has splintered ever since, and various other agendas have come to the fore. It did prompt a considerable sort of global awakening, if I can use the term, with the people waking up to the fact, basically, that there's something slightly wrong with the picture. If you can remember when you needed to tune in your television set, Andrew, or even tune in the radio, a lot of people are aware of the fact now that the pictures that, our reality, our hologram here on planet Earth isn't quite what we've been led to believe it is.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And just a couple of very quick points on that. People always say history repeats itself, and I say the reason it does that is because we don't learn the lessons from history. Various inquiries are going into the COVID fiasco and what happened. The initial reports that we've had has been said there was a systematic failure of people to plan properly and to take appropriate steps. All sorts of things are coming out of the Scottish COVID inquiry as well. Things like do not resuscitate orders. It is an absolute scandal that we need to have a look at. And I always say that sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Very good.
Absolutely. Basil, final words?
Stay tuned to TNT. Stay tuned to today's News Talk. We're the best place for sober, rational analysis. We don't descend into conspiracy theories or wild accusations here. We like to delve properly into the facts and get the relevant experts on board and then allow people to draw their own conclusions. And in that respect, I'm going to be joined by Nick Buckley, former candidate for Mayor of Manchester, to look at what, if it was happening in South Asia, would be called communal violence. It's the only way of putting it, really. Riots all over Britain, Hartlepool, London, Southport, and this hot weather. Unfortunately, as you know, Andrew, the Brits get a bit overexcited, don't we, when the sun's out?
Everything's extreme.
Beers are drunk.
Absolutely. And they always say, ever since records began, it's the hottest whatever. Bizarre stuff. And the other point I would make, and good news, is we always say we give everybody a voice here. We do want people to get in touch. Jeremy, our brilliant producer, says that he is onto it about Channel 3, and hopefully here on the Muckrakers we're going to get him back. I'll be back on the Muckrakers tomorrow with George and Marty, which will be brilliant. But Taylor, wrap us up.
Yes, great discussion. And let me just let the viewers know, this is something that we are going to continue to discuss. The issues of disinformation, misinformation put forth, by the way, by the mainstream. It is not an issue that's going away, but you can always count on us at the Muckrakers to give you a cohesive, sound analysis of the pressing issues of the day. I'm your host, Taylor Hudak. I want to thank my co-hosts, Andrew Eborn and Basil Valentine.
Very quickly, it seems we need to do one of these programs about once a fortnight because, fresh events happen for which the official stories aren't always true at regular intervals. So we have to do this once every couple of weeks, I think.
I agree. Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you all for watching. We'll be back tomorrow, same time. Thank you once again.
To hear a replay of this hour, go to episodes at tntradio.live. Now, TNT Radio News.
Back again with your hourly news brief. I'm Matt Boyland. A teenage volleyball player who was left partially paralysed with brain damage after being knocked unconscious by a transgender opponent has slammed the Olympics over its boxing controversy. It follows shocking revelations that two biological male boxers who failed gender tests had been cleared to fight women at this year's Games in Paris. Peyton McNabb of South Carolina was just 17 when she was knocked unconscious by a volleyball that had been hit by a biological male playing for the other team in 2022. The ball was travelling at 70 miles per hour, with the power of the hit knocking her unconscious. She was left with a traumatic brain injury, partial paralysis on her right side, and